Hi Ian, I really loved hearing recently about your experience consulting on behalf of the Web3 and blockchain client base you have in particular. Certainly from our perspective, when recruiting on behalf of these businesses, we've noticed considerable points of difference in the way they craft their employee experience. I'm thinking about some of the heads of people directors and heads of talent acquisition in our community who might be being approached about job opportunities in Web3 and blockchain startups to whom some of these features might be a little bit lesser understood and lesser known. With them in mind, would you be happy to very briefly share some of your observations and learnings as far as how the people experience differs in these kind of businesses? Thank you very much.
Hello. Well, firstly, if I had to summarise what Web3 is in general, I believe it's the next generation of the internet where users can read, write and crucially own their content. So unlike the current internet, where content is owned by platforms, on-chain content remains the property of the creator. So this could be your writing or your money, that for example doesn't need a third party, i.e. bank, to hold. So the key theme in Web3 is ownership. And I think what we're seeing is that is bleeding into the Web3 employee experience. So I'm always asking myself, how can I give employees ownership over their own careers? So let me give you a few examples, all of which could, and in many cases are, already applied in Web2 companies. So let's start with the ownership of who I work for. So unlike the traditional company/employee relationship, you tend to see people working for many different DAOs, companies, doing work for hire, i.e. bounty work, and sometimes working under different identities. So I can be the economics master for a finance project with one identity, but then also be the meme king for a gaming platform. Number two is ownership over where I work and when I work. So global teams are standard in Web3. Most companies were set up from day one to do most of their work async. This means, for example, that global salaries are much more common in Web3 than Web2 because of this. Number three, ownership of company data, i.e. transparency. The very public nature of the blockchain means transparency is usually a starting point for Web3 companies. For example, you can see what people get paid for the work they do in bounties, or you can see how much DAOs are paying their people because they have to openly request it. You can also see every day what your tokens are worth instead of some lofty grand vision for the equity you hold in a traditional Web2 company. You can see how much the projects hold in their treasury, and so there's no financial surprises. Number four, ownership of your career progression. The nature of a manager is often different, and Web3 companies usually start out with much less hierarchy. Things run more like a self-managed team. So for example, one of the orgs I run everybody runs their own review process. If they want feedback, then they request it. We don't mandate a set process that everyone must follow. Number five, ownership of compensation. So one way I've seen this achieved is most companies let you decide how you split your compensation between tokens, cash, and sometimes equity. And in fact, companies like Kraken even let you adjust that on a monthly basis. Last but not least, number six, public ownership of what you build. So you need to be much more public in what you do in Web3. Particularly, you need more ownership of the things you're building. Names and reputations matter a lot in Web3, and the reason for this is that you usually rely on a wider community support to achieve what you want, i.e. for the community to vote for your proposals, or in many cases to vote you into your position. So Web3 is still a very new space and there's a lot to work out. It's also important to note that Web3 companies can definitely learn a lot from some of their more progressive Web2 companies. But in general, the biggest difference is the DAO structure, meaning decentralized autonomous organizations. So as a key takeaway, if anybody hasn't heard of that structure, then I urge you to do some Googling.